Thanks for tuning in. This is William Wagener for We the People, and we're here to do a Zoom interview with attorney Joan Jackson, representing the dispossessed of her home fraudulently by a multitude of parties. Attorney Joan Jackson, what documents did the sheriff show Cindy that gave them the authorization to evict her?
Okay, so first, I'm Joan Jackson, the attorney who helped Cindy, who was dispossessed. It wasn't me that was dispossessed. Does your audience, are they familiar with Cindy's case, or can I give a brief overview?
Give a brief overview and then.
Yeah, because it'll help the context in which, the documents were delivered. Okay, so Cindy Brown is an Olympic gold medalist in basketball. She, with her winnings and her earnings from the peaks that she reached in athleticism and coaching, she purchased a beautiful home in Orange County. At some point, someone, through identity theft, was able to take her title and mortgage the house for about $880,000. Cindy began fighting her battle as early as 2008. She reported the crime. Title theft is very prevalent now, and it's not even difficult for criminals to get access to your title information. So back in 2008, they got her title information, got a loan for several loans totaling $880,000. And then Cindy's first lawsuit was in 2008, in which she tried to undo all the instruments that had been used to mortgage her home. The battle raged for several years, going through several stages. The main character now that remains in this lawsuit is the Bank of New York Mellon. One of my favorite quotes is, if you give a man a gun, he can rob a bank. But if you give a man a bank, he can rob the world. And we have the greatest criminals that we have, literally, in the United States and in the world are bankers, right? I call it platinum collar crimes. Now, what happened to Cindy wasn't, the same disastrous thing that happened with the housing bust and all the stuff that they did back then. But still, in that vein, this bank has come now into possession of the title of Cindy's home. And they were trying to evict her, even though everyone knew that the documents used were fraudulent. So starting with this background of the bank knowing that it's fraudulent and everybody still taking this place to strip this woman of her home, here's how it proceeded. In 2008, she brought the lawsuit to undo the instruments. That battled on for 9 years, went up on appeal. Finally, it was dismissed on summary judgment. And what's amazing is that this case has gone on for so long. And if it was truly done rightfully, if she were wrong, if she had mortgaged her house and gotten $800,000 out of it, you would assume that the case would have been over a long time ago. But because of the strength of her battle, her integrity, and her faith, she battled on, and people believed, and it lingered. Unfortunately, it was countered by government officials being willing to turn a blind eye to the criminal acts.
And more fraud.
Excuse me?
And there was more fraud. I mean, it started with an application that she never touched.
Correct.
And on that application, whoever the banker was checked off, I'm sitting with Cindy Brown, check it off, a white woman.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And if you've ever seen Cindy,
yeah,
she's the blackest white woman I've ever seen.
Okay, so clearly the due diligence done by the bank who issued the checks was negligent. There wasn't the due diligence that needed to be, especially for $800,000. Oh, okay. And so anyway, moving forward, her case, her first case in 2008 ends in summary judgment. Now I asked Cindy, why is it that you have all these different cases, and why did you lose here and why did you lose there? And she said it wasn't that, the bad acts hadn't happened to her. It was because she had ineffective assistance of counsel. All right. So she hired 4 different attorneys. They didn't get the job done properly for her, and as a result, it lingered. She took over for herself. I've had many folks have asked, why is she representing herself? Why didn't she get an attorney?
That's a good question,
Mhm.
Attorney Jackson.
Mhm.
And I remember the blonde bimbo she had for an attorney for a while.
Mhm.
And I was actually in that attorney's office late at night
Mhm.
trying to get an interview from her when two people showed up and gave that attorney a big envelope packed with cash. And she later asked me to drive her to the bank to deposit it.
Mhm.
I think now, looking back, those people were from the bank paying off that attorney.
Wow.
So she would deliberately not file
Mhm.
correctly and throw Cindy
Under
under
the bus.
the
You
bus.
know what?
It was
I-
intentional. I'm not naming that
Mhm.
dis-
Okay, that's fine.
disbarred person,
Mhm.
but I was watching this happen in real time, and after that, Cindy Brown figured out her attorney was her own worst enemy, and that's why she has such a problem trusting any attorneys anymore.
Right.
And there was another attorney, I believe, before that. And that same attorney threw other people under the bus, all thinking she was going to help. But
Okay. Well,
going down, they lost the notary book, that these forged documents, the notary page is not there.
okay.
And it's just one
Actually,
fraud, but go ahead.
what you just said fills in some gaps, because when she told me she had ineffective assistance of counsel from 4 separate attorneys, and subsequently all 4 were disbarred, I was like, as much veracity as Cindy has, as much evidence that must have mounted that she didn't take the loan out, she was a victim of identity theft and title fraud. How could you not prevail in a case where there's so much evidence that Miss Brown did no wrong? You have to literally be paid to lose. So your story about the woman receiving an envelope of cash, I can truly believe that happened, and that's why her
It did
attorneys
happen.
didn't show up for her. No, I meant that the cash was to pay them to not adequately represent
Right,
Miss Brown.
throw Cindy under the bus.
Birch is
Didn't realize it at the time.
Yeah. Okay. So here we have ineffective assistance. She's now representing herself. She's an intelligent, passionate woman. And the thing about Cindy, she didn't become an Olympic gold athlete because she's a slouch. This woman
Focused.
learns the rules, goes by the rules, practices, is disciplined, is not faint of heart. She's filled with faith, and she takes action. And so all of these aspects of her characteristic, plus others, I'm sure her character, have led her to survive in this, litigation nightmare for over 12 years. It's amazing that she still has her mind and can function and do other things. As every day there's a chance that there'll be some underhand trick or sleight of hand that would have gotten her evicted, like ultimately it did on November 16th. This woman has such fortitude based on her faith. It is incredible to behold. So here we go now. So there's a 2008 case that ended in 2016 on summary judgment because of ineffective assistance of counsel. And then she had another case that she initiated, which ended because there were multiple defendants, all of them were defaulted, and only one defendant remained, and that was the Bank of New York Mellon. And the Bank of New York Mellon was deemed by the court in this instance to not be an appropriate defendant because they felt that New York Mellon hadn't had anything to do with fraud or creating the situation that allowed the house to be mortgaged in the first place. So that ended, and so after that case ended, the Bank of New York Mellon moved to evict her to get judgment possession of the property in an unlawful detainer court. And so unlawful detainer is limited jurisdiction, and they only look at certain things. They really weren't willing to look at the title and the documents that Cindy may have had. And at the time, Cindy didn't have everything that she has now. It's almost like peeling an onion, and there's different layers. And over the course of time, some discovery then led to other discovery, led to other things. So now Cindy is fully armed with all the documentation that shows the Bank of New York Mellon is complicit in some of the fraud that allowed the house to be mortgaged or sold. So she has a deed of trust. So now here we are. She had the unlawful detainer lawsuit that was filed against her in 2007. She fought it for 3 years. It only just ended in 2020. And so what they got at the end of that case was a writ of possession, i.e. now the sheriff can put Cindy out and they can take the home. Well, Cindy is, like I said, she's got such great character and so convincing and credible that the sheriff would not evict her based on the things that she was showing them. So the bank is getting frustrated because they're like, hey, this has been going on for a long time and we want to get our house. And the sheriff's like, we're not putting her out. There's too many things here that are in question for us to put this woman out of her house. So in 2020, after the bank got the writ of possession to evict Cindy, she went back into, she had to go now to a regular court. An unlawful detainer court is a very specific thing. It wants to be done in 6 weeks. It doesn't want to look at anything of significance. And the only way she could fight to have all these documents that she's since discovered viewed was to move the case, to open a case in regular state court, unlimited jurisdiction.
Civil unlimited.
Yeah, and that's what she did. So
smart. She's a smart person, Cindy Brown.
She's a smart person, and she's got help from other smart people who believe in her fight and want to support her. So she she filed a complaint in 2020, and that was to challenge the veracity of the title by the bank and stop. And the first thing she moved to do was she asked the court for a restraining order to stop the bank from evicting her. Now the court now in state court, the judge looked at all of the documents that Cindy had. The trustee's deed of trust wasn't done properly. It wasn't notarized properly. All of this stuff is suspicious. And when it comes to evicting someone from their home, you have to have all your I's dotted and all your T's crossed. It has to be done the right way. And they hadn't done it the right way, but the unlawful detainer court didn't want to look at that level of information because it was limited jurisdiction. So now here we've got the judge in the state court. He's willing to look at all of this. He looked at her complaint, all of her causes of action. He looked at all of the information that she brought forward, including the notary book of the notary who supposedly signed off on this.
Supposedly signed off.
So on the page where the bank's representative, where their name is written, there is no thumbprint, there's no signature. No one personally appeared before the notary with regard to the veracity of this document. And so when you're
not make it fraud right there? Does that scream fraud?
Okay, now it doesn't necessarily mean, well, I don't want to say it this way. I'm not ruling out fraud, but I'm not going to accuse the Bank of New York Mellon of fraudulent intent at multiple stages. But what they don't have is a legitimate trustee's deed of sale. And the way they tried to hide it, they didn't do what they were supposed to do. And they didn't want to be called into account because clearly this thing would not have washed if it had been examined properly. And so they are, so back to the state court judge, Cindy goes forward and says, please stop the eviction. I have all this evidence that you need to look at. They should not be entitled to my house. They did not do things the proper way. And the judge says, wow, Ms. Brown, you got 5 or 6 causes of action that you have a really good chance of making stick. I like you, not that I like you, I like that you have all this stuff here. There's more than sufficient information that you've presented for me to rule on your behalf. Stop the eviction while this case is pending.
And he gave her a TRO till what, April 28th?
No, so here's what happened. They gave her a temporary restraining order that had no date for expiration. And then they told the defense counsel for the bank, you need to come in, you need to file your documents in opposition by this date. Otherwise, we're going to consider granting a permanent injunction. And so what happened was the day that the court issued the temporary restraining order was October 5th of 2020. The attorneys for the bank rushed out and removed the case to federal court.
Well, wait a minute. That's not a cause to remove it to federal court.
Well, there's two reasons for a case to be in federal court. One is it's a federal question. It's either a federal law, it happened on federal property, et cetera, or diversity jurisdiction. And diversity jurisdiction means the two parties are from different states. And the party, let's say from New York, says, hey, I don't think I'm going to get a good shot in California. So, or in California state court. So let's take it to federal court in California. So they removed it to federal court in California. All right. So, but what happens is when you remove a case to federal court, there are certain things that you have to do. You have to say, oh, federal judge, here's all the documents in the state case. Here are all the orders that the state judge issued. Here's everything for your consideration. That's what they're obligated to do that in order to effect a proper removal.
And did attorneys Mays Ryan law firm do that?
In this case, they removed the case using only the complaint, not all the other things, and definitely not the temporary restraining order.
Wouldn't you as an attorney call that fraud on the federal court where Josephine Stanton is sitting?
I think I wouldn't. I hesitate to call it fraud.
To me, I'm one of the people. It looks like fraud to me.
Okay. I do hesitate in my heart of hearts. I'm like, hell yeah, that was fraud, right? You did it just so that you could turn around and effect the eviction. But in my attorney state, I would say clearly it was misbehavior, misconduct on the part of the attorney. And here's why. It's not just I didn't send all the documents to the federal court. He also kept quiet about it, didn't say anything. Now, the state court says, by this date, you file all your papers in support of your case, your side.
And that date is still April 28th of 2021.
No.
Right?
Sorry. I mean, you've got a good date on the end, but there's all kinds of stuff that goes into it. Okay. So they said, come into the court, tell us why we shouldn't grant a permanent injunction in this case. So, and that date that they were supposed to submit the paperwork was like probably in the middle of October, right? And the hearing date was October 27th. So 22 days after the TRO was issued, they were going to look at granting a permanent injunction. So instead of coming forward saying, hey, don't grant the permanent injunction because we're legit, we've done everything right, we have nothing to fear, let's go forward with this case, whatever the case was, they didn't do it. They removed the case to federal court on the same day, the TRO, but they said nothing. They said nothing and showed up on the 27th for the hearing and said, oh, guess what, by the way, we've removed the case to federal court, too bad, so sad, out of here, you can't do anything. Now, what took place between October 5th, when they removed the case, and when they showed up on October 27th for the permanent injunction hearing, was the TRO lapsed. Only because whenever you remove a case to federal court, the standing orders only have 10 days. And the person who moved to get those orders has to request in federal court to renew those orders. Now, these attorneys said nothing. They removed the case, and 22 days later, after the lapse of the TRO, they're like, ha, neener, we moved the case. You can't do anything, too bad, so sad. And by the way, we're going straight to the sheriff's, well, they didn't say this part. They went straight to the sheriff's office and said, evict this woman now. Right?
Now, what is a state officer like a sheriff? What authority does he have to act on a federal thing? And was that filed? Was it signed by Judge Josephine Stanton?
Okay.
Or only signed by Judge May or Attorney Mays?
Okay. So what the sheriff acted on was the state unlawful detainer court writ of execution. So the sheriff in and of did not promote something that it was for the marshal federal court law enforcement officers to do. He acted on the unlawful detainer issued by the state court.
Way back in when?
Back in, I think, July of this year.
But they were all supposed to come together on April 28th.
Okay,
This sounds,
so
as one of the people, I'm not a practicing attorney, I'm a journalist. And it just smacks to me of trickery, legal trickery under color of law.
sure. So here's what happened.
That's the nicest thing I can say about it.
Yeah. So
I
yeah,
got some
really.
other things I could say about it.
So
but-
now let me address this April 28th date that is looming in the future. So when opposing counsel came to the hearing on October 27th and said, guess what, we've removed the case. The judge said, all right, you've removed the case. Here's what you now have to do. If this order, the TRO, is vacated by the federal court or somehow becomes invalid, you need to give me immediate notice. And that's what the state court judge said to defense counsel. Well, defense counsel has already acted as though that the TRO has already lapsed because they hid the fact that they removed the case October 5th. Didn't say anything to deny Ms. Brown the opportunity to go to federal court and have it renewed. And so the state court said, give us notice if the TRO is vacated or no longer valid. And we will continue again in April, on April 28th, we'll re-meet if, this whole case, it's like a status conference. We'll get back together in April, just in case nothing's gone on with the federal case. So basically, when a case is removed to federal court, the judge has some liberty to remand it back to state court if they want to. So the state court judge is saying, basically, we want to keep our eyes on this case. So check back in with us in April. Now that led Cindy to believe, hey, I got a break here, not until April, at least temporarily I have a break. And so that's what we were proceeding on, thinking that they were going to act properly in federal court, do what they were supposed to do in federal court. If they tried to vacate the notice, they would give her notice of the vacation of the federal court, of the temporary restraining order, but they didn't do any of that. They went in, removed it, waited the time, didn't say anything, prevented her from knowing she needed to go to federal court, and then rushed to the sheriff with the old UD judgment from state court and said, lock her out now. Can you hold on for a moment? I'll be right back.
Hold. Wow. It sounds like Cindy was not given any legal notice. They even went to federal court, so she couldn't even appear. That's what I'm understanding. I have to ask Attorney Jackson when she returns here. I apologize for the issues today, but this is what we have to do when we're on a phony pandemic lockdown everywhere, and even our studio is closed. So I appreciate Stephen Pass, who's recording this, and Joan Jackson for being so patient with me. So it appears to me Cindy didn't even get noticed. They were removing it to the federal court.
Right.
It appears to me Josephine Stanton, if she signed anything, and that's my next question, did she sign any order? Was it court stamped and filed so that Cindy might possibly stumble into it without even knowing it's been done?
No. So he removed the case to federal court. I don't know. Apparently nothing happened in which Cindy was given any kind of notice. The TRO lapsed. They went to the sheriff. Now, get this. The sheriff is well-versed in Cindy's case, and they're like, we're not locking this woman out. And so what counsel did was he went to county counsel. So these are the attorneys that work with county organizations, the county council. And he went to a particular deputy county council and he said, look, this case has been going on for a long time. And every time I turn around and I think I've got a writ of possession and I'm having want the sheriff to lock her out, they don't do it. Now, I've got a writ of possession. The TRO has lapsed. It lapsed by function of law after 10 days. Once I removed it, it's gone and done. There is no reason to not evict this woman. And get this, if you don't move to force the sheriff to evict this woman, I'm going to bring a lawsuit against Orange County for obstruction of justice.
What did the county council say to Attorney Mays of the Ryan Law Firm?
I think she said, oh, I wasn't aware of all these different things. I'll look into it. And then I don't know what she said at the very end, but it doesn't matter. The sheriff came and locked her out. So now on the day of the lockout.
Who was that deputy county counsel?
Vanessa Atkins.
Vanessa Atkins. Do you think today, as we sit here comfortable in our homes and Cindy's freezing in her car with her dog's head on her lap in front of her own house that was stolen from her, the equity was stolen, and a lot of things were stolen from her through no fault of her own. Do you think Vanessa understands what we've just talked about and discussed?
Oh, she knows. She knows. She knows, and let me tell you why. They locked Cindy out on the 16th. Cindy did an emergency application to be restored to possession of her house. And the judge, without any of the previous state court file, and only the documents that showed the history of the litigation.
Which judge, the federal judge or the state judge?
The federal judge.
Talking about Josephine Staten.
Josephine Staten. She said, this case has been going on for a long time. I see where you brought all these cases and you lost and you appealed and you lost. And in every instance, Bank of America, Bank of New York Mellon prevailed. So I'm just going to decide that you don't have much of a case. And when I hear you asking me to return you to your house, I am looking at all the times that you lost. I'm going to think that you don't have a case, and I'm going to go ahead and rule because this case has gone on too damn long.
So Josephine did sign a document.
So I didn't see that Josephine signed anything before Cindy was evicted.
Oh.
I'm looking at the order in which she denied Cindy's request to be put back into her home.
Oh.
And so she said, the standard for granting a temporary restraining order is there at least has to be some chance that you can prevail. And so we have to balance that with how injured will you be if we don't grant this order. But the first standard is you have to have, the semblance of being able to prevail. Now, our state court judge who saw all of the documents that Cindy presented and her cause of action said, I see at least 5 areas where you could prevail. And so I'm going to give you the TRO. So with counsel Mays removing the case, only providing the complaint. And then when he was forced to speak at the ex parte application, provided documents of the history of the case, but not the current documents that would have been in the case file that Cindy provided to the state court judge. So now we've got, the federal court judge only looking at what this attorney provided. But then she found out that there had been a temporary restraining order. And she's like, what? How come you didn't tell me about this temporary restraining order, Attorney Mays?
When did that conversation happen? Today?
This all happened I have the minute order of the court that was signed on November 23rd. So this is almost a week after Cindy's been evicted.
So now Josephine Staten is aware.
Yeah, she's aware. So she's like, wait a minute, Attorney Mays, you've been a bad, bad boy. You removed this case without providing all the documentation you were supposed to. You did not provide me with the information about these orders, the temporary restraining order. I think you're sneaky. I think you did what you did because you were trying to get past a valid court order at the time. You've done things that are unprincipled, and I'm going to smack your wrist. So you better bring yourself into my courtroom, or at least virtually, on December 4th and tell me why I shouldn't sanction you, because you've been a bad, bad boy. But on the flip side, I don't see where Cindy has much of a case. The bank has always won, and I think the bank is going to continue to win. So no, I am not going to grant your request to be returned to your house. But I am going to spank the hands of this attorney for misbehaving. Now, when I read that, I'm like, oh my God, how in the world can you understand that this attorney has basically lied by omission, has deceptively not provided all of the documents? He removed the case on October 5th, knowing that there was only a 10-day window to keep those orders valid. And it was 22 days after he removed the case, 12 days after the TRO would have lapsed, that he shows up in court and even tells them that he removed the case. The federal court didn't make any ruling to vacate the TRO, but it was lost or expired as a function of him removing the case to federal court. And the judge was furious, or at least upset, and willing to sanction this attorney because she felt that he had been deceptive, but she still would not grant relief to Cindy. And it's just like, wait a minute, honey. Sorry, judge. You know this man has lied to you. I mean, let's just human to human. Let's call it like it is. You know he lied to you. You know he has no credibility. You know he only presented what he wanted you to see, and you know you have an incomplete record. Why would you rely on anything that he said or omitted to determine whether or not this woman has a viable case in this instance? Why would you rely on that and say, I don't think you have anything. Sorry, too bad, so sad. You're not back in your house. It's like, it just makes no sense. If he was bad enough to sanction, he's bad enough not to trust anything that he did. And that's where my heart just, how could you as a judge make a judgment without having access to all the information?
I have no clue how the judge could.
I don't either.
That blows my mind.
Yeah.
This judge, Josephine Staton, do you know how much she sanctioned the Ryan law firm or attorney?
Sanctions haven't happened yet. The hearing's on December 4th.
December 4th.
Yes.
Let me know. I'd like to zoom in and listen on that hearing.
Okay. So here's what I did. I took Judge Stanton's order saying, Mays, you're a bad, bad boy. And I took it and gave it to county council. And I said, county council, you got tricked. You got played by a bad, bad boy. And you used your influence to get the sheriff, who otherwise would not have evicted Cindy, to evict her. I said, now what can you do about it? And you know what she did? She called me back and she said, I am so sorry. I am furious with Mays for tricking me like this. And those aren't her exact words, but you get the idea. I am furious, but I can't do nothing. My hands are tied.
Vanessa said my hands are tied?
Basically, I can't do anything. We don't own that property. It's not county property. So I can't allow the sheriff, I can't tell the sheriffs to let her back in. Because at the time that I contacted county council, I'm like, look, at least right now, at least let her in so she can gather, changes of clothes, her gold medals, her precious stuff, her photos, and her legal documents, which Cindy believes that opposing counsel is going through and destroying some of her stuff. I said, at least let her get in.
There was a photo of Attorney Mays standing in a doorway and someone else carrying a fire extinguisher out of the house.
Oh, I don't even want to think of what that means.
And I'm wondering, why would they need to carry a fire extinguisher out of Cindy's house?
How about this? Why would they need a battering ram?
They're just supposed to change the locks and lock it up.
Oh, but they brought a battering ram.
Yeah, well, they got to fix that. But
not just a locksmith, a battering ram.
Yeah.
And Cindy, who's familiar with guns because she's in law enforcement of sorts, said that they had weapons that are literally military grade. They brought someone to catch her dog. They brought military grade weapons. There were multiple sheriffs out there, and they had a battering ram. I've never seen that kind of force used to do a lockout in my life.
Well, they've never run into a highly focused Olympian who stood for America and won the women's basketball gold medal in 1988. She is quite a unique individual, and they probably never have encountered anyone like her. So let me ask you, now we got the picture. Judge Josephine is washing her hand and saying, well, you probably can't win anyway. And County Counsel Vanessa is saying, nothing I can do. I'm angry, but nothing I can do.
Okay, here's what I was
How are we
asking.
going to get this back to the state judge so the state judge can some reams, some butts?
Yeah, I was just asking County Counsel to get her escorted in so she could get critical stuff. That's all. Because with all that firepower and everything they had, they would not let her in her house the day they evicted her, just to grab some things. And that's what I was asking her for. And so she said, I can do nothing.
I think it's a blessing that she wasn't home when they, I think it's a blessing. She wasn't home when they battered her door in, because had she been home, she'd have probably been dead.
Possibly.
They had AR-15s. We have photos of them approaching her door with AR-15s.
You're right. And Black Lives Matter would have been all over Orange County protesting the death of this black
I don't understand why Black Lives Matter haven't done a twit about this.
You know what? I would say this. I think Cindy is such the incredible person that she hasn't tried to mobilize Black Lives Matter. She has tried to, do what she's supposed to do in the court system.
Yeah, she believes
I've done nothing wrong.
She believes
I should
in
be
law.
able to go to the court system and get justice. And so she hasn't tried to get Black Lives Matter. She hasn't tried to make this a media circus. And this is the exact temperature in which it can happen. And the email string back and forth between Attorney Mays and County Counsel talked about their concern about with this environment and everything else. Of course, that's referring to Black Lives Matter and Black people being subjected to no justice in this system. And so they're cognizant of it and they're afraid of it.
In this case, I think this Black life does matter. Cindy Brown's life does matter. Her rights do matter. And it makes me, besides being a journalist, as a human being that went to Vietnam thinking I was fighting for a country that protected our liberties, and to see a person of her renown battered like this, her door kicked in, her dog doesn't understand why he can't go home.
Right.
And Cindy, this is just an outrage for Black Lives Matter to sit around up in Portland and San Francisco and do nothing. Tells me Black Lives Matter don't really care about her Black life.
Oh, true. Well, Black Lives Matter has its own agenda that has nothing to do with Black lives, but that's a whole separate conversation. Right?
That's a different conversation, but
is.
That's what it tells me. So let me ask you, now that we've gone through this, so your motion Monday is just to get permission for her to get her stuff out. You just want to get her stuff out.
The motion on Monday is to give Judge Staten a chance to reconsider her decision. Cindy has provided the court now with the underlying state documents. And Cindy is saying, Your Honor, you didn't have everything to consider when you made your ruling. I want you to see what the state court judge saw when he granted the TRO, and I want to give you an opportunity to do the right thing. Period.
Good. Now,
so that's what Linda is.
Answer me 5 simple questions.
Sure.
What document did the sheriff show Cindy that gave them the authorization to evict her on the day they did this? You know?
I believe it was a reinstatement of the writ of possession.
Okay. What was the document signed by the judge of either court?
In which, and there's a whole bunch, so narrow that down for me.
That document, the writ of possession, was it that document signed by the judge of either the state or federal court?
No, I think the judge was signed, I'm sorry, the reinstatement of the writ of possession was signed by an officer in the sheriff's office.
Does he have authority to do that?
Well, this is a different document. So the writ of possession, which was issued in July, was issued by the court, and a judicial officer signed it. It was legit. It was legit, given their bad decision to.
Yeah, the prior bad decision.
Right. Okay, but it was still a legit writ of possession, even though the decision was bad. So what the sheriff received was a valid writ of possession based on a valid judgment, right?
But Cindy had been given no notice of that document.
No, hold on. So she was given notice of the original writ of possession, right? You got 5 days to vacate, but that was back in July.
Why?
July. And so she's been fighting. That's right. She's been fighting and doing whatever it took to stay in possession and to move her case forward. So here, fast forward now, like 4 or 5 months, and they go back with that writ of possession. They've already convinced county council that the TRO is gone and it was done the right way. And so the sheriff says, you know, we've already had this writ. We've already served this writ. We've already given her notice. We're just going to reinstate and go in and lock her out. We don't even have to give her new notice. We don't have to give her any notice. So here she goes out to grab breakfast, comes back, and her place is surrounded by sheriff deputies. Her door's been battered in, and they're inside her house going through her things. You're right. I agree. If she had been there, they probably would have shot her.
They would have shot her dead to make sure that ended it.
Yeah.
So is it fair to say this attorney, Mays, is the one who orchestrated the sheriffs to amass a 20-armed SWAT team, armed sheriff officers on taxpayers' money to unlawfully remove one Black woman? Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement. That Attorney Mays went and tried to coerce county council to cooperate, to convince the sheriff to evict her despite the sheriff's reluctance to do so. And it was done they did it on a day where the court in Orange County was closed for a week, and where it was right before Thanksgiving, and you know things are going to be shut down. And I mean, it's been a mess of trying to get through to judicial officers to get, ex parte applications filed in time and everything else. So I think it was exquisitely and maliciously orchestrated by that law firm, and at the head of the machinations, I would say, was Attorney Andrew Mays.
So would it be fair to ask the Bar Association of California to disbar Attorney Mays and sanction all of the possessions of the Ryan law firm and all their personal possessions, their pensions, their savings account, as a punitive measure to teach other attorneys, don't do this. Don't do this unlawful under color of law trickery.
I'm with you all the way, Mr. Wagener, but
I'm just asking the question. I'm just asking you the question.
The state bar doesn't have the authority to sanction possessions and all that.
Who does? Does that state judge?
I think it was fair to ask, but you can go to the state bar, excuse me, and say, these are all the things that happen. Here's what this attorney did, and I would like you to investigate and sanction this attorney for his behavior. We've already got a judge who's willing to sanction him or considered sanctioning him.
Well, that's the federal judge. Couldn't the state judge also sanction the law firm and specifically Attorney Mays?
I don't know if you can sanction the law firm. Maybe you can, because Attorney Mays, sorry about that. Let me grab some water so I can clear my throat.
This is just horrific.
Okay.
To me, this is horrific that this could happen to a Black person or a white person or a Chinese person or any American, especially somebody who represented America, who represented that flag back there, represented that flag to the world in women's basketball and was a gold medal winner.
Mhm.
To me, this is just unconscionable. And I can't see why Sheriff Harder and the other sergeant and that SWAT team
Mhm.
should not be sued,
Mhm.
should not lose their policeman certification. I mean, they put up some resistance.
Okay.
They should have known that there's something going on here that doesn't meet the standard that
Mhm.
justice requires.
Well, here's what happened. So when Cindy called me on the day she had been locked out, I called the sheriff's office and I said, they're not willing to, they weren't willing to listen to Cindy, nothing. I said, I'd like to speak to a supervisor. There's no point in talking to a deputy at this point because they've already stated their position. So I said, let me speak to a supervisor. And I did, Sergeant Villa. And basically, here's what I heard from 3 different officers from the sheriff's office. We had Investigator Perry, we had Detective Camarina, and we had Sergeant Villa. And they all said a combination of these things. Don't want to see anything from you that's not dated today or after. Not willing to consider anything from the past. All of these past concerns have been resolved. It's over and done. This is what we have to carry out. She can't step on the property. She'll be arrested for trespass. She can't go in the property. She can give us a list of a few things if she wants us to grab it. If basically the only way that we will consider letting her back in is she has an order from a court dated today or after. We're not even going to look at the TRO. It's over. It's done. It's dead. And that's how it's going to go. You don't get in for nothing unless you have a new, fresh order. And I said to the sergeant, I said, you have an opportunity to prevent a total miscarriage of justice. These are documents that you should look at. They need to be considered. The court issued a minute order on the 27th after finding out that the case had been removed. The order says this, this, and this, and they're like, we're not having it. It's just over. It has to be an order dated today or after. And so now I understand why they were so solid on this, because, county council had been brought in to bear to counsel the sheriff to go ahead and lock her out, because the sheriff had hesitated and refused on several instances before November 16th. So it was so sad to me that, and Cindy's a peaceful person.
She is.
She wasn't trying, and she's saying, look, here's all the stuff that's going on. And they're just like, we can't hear you. Maybe they were saying, look, our hearts kind of go out to you. We kind of think you're legit with this, but we have our orders. So we can't hear it. We can't hear it. We just have to put you out. Sorry. And I'm saying it in a way that like, okay, this is the nice way to say it. But the truth was, it was like, look, we can't even listen to you. If we're wrong, sue us. And that was the basic attitude. Sue us if we're wrong.
Do you think Cindy should sue the sheriffs?
My heart says no. And it says no because they resisted locking her out for quite some time. Hold on a second. Hey. Can you turn that down? Can you turn it down?
Wow.
Oops. All right. So the sheriff said, we're not trying to evict this woman. She's got different orders. It's too much for us to make a decision that is so impactful. So we're gonna stand down and not evict her. And for that reason, and because the only reason why they did evict her, I believe, is because county council brought this to bear on them. I wouldn't go after suing. Personally, I wouldn't want to go and sue the sheriff's office, because it seemed like they tried to do the right thing. But once they decided to go and do the eviction, boy, did they show up strong with some attitude and some big guns and a big battering ram. So yeah. I don't know. It's not for me to call it. It's for Cindy to call it. And, if the judge turns around and does the right thing, if county council uses whatever she has to help make sure Cindy gets her stuff, and the judge returns possession. I think Cindy would just say, I'm glad to be back in my house. I'll see if they took anything or destroyed anything. And if I've been damaged like that in that regard, then yeah, I'll definitely do something. But my guess is if they let Cindy back in her home, she probably would just be moving forward with trying to get justice using the legal system to do so.
Yeah,
And
Cindy tries to do everything legally, and
yes,
if I was in if I was a black man who had won a gold medal Olympian,
mhm,
as peaceful as I want to be,
mhm,
I think at some point here, I would have called Black Lives Matter and say, hey guys, I got a soup kitchen. I'll feed you as long as you stand here
mhm,
and deal with the outrage. Because it's just an outrageous. First of all, she didn't sign those documents to remortgage her house. Second of all, the notary disappears.
Right.
Third of all, there was a guy named Diamond involved. And what he has to do with the bank, New York Mellon, or any other bank, I have no clue.
he
But
was the one who got the checks.
He doesn't seem to want to talk to me.
Oh, well, Craig
The
Diamond.
sheriffs don't want to talk to me. But here's another thing. Maybe you don't know this. Sometime in the last 6, 7, 8 months, a sheriff's deputy did something he should not have done.
Mhm,
And Cindy filed a criminal complaint on the advice
mhm.
of another Orange County Sheriff's deputy who advised her. And
Mhm.
that is still pending.
Okay.
That's a criminal charge against, and I got to think in the background, these sheriffs are thinking, well, if we do this for Mr. Mays, maybe that criminal prosecution against one of our brothers in the sheriff's office will just get dismissed by the new DA, Spitzer,
Mhm,
who I have very little faith in, less faith than I have in the elections,
mhm.
which I have no faith in the
Mhm.
integrity of our current elections,
Sure.
but that's a different story. To me, it looks like the real problem here is that people can steal other people's homes and get away with it, and
Mhm.
they never get a jury trial. She's been fighting this, I think, at least 15, 16, 17 years. I've only been watching it and documenting it for 6 or 7 years,
Okay.
and she has never got a jury trial. And I think we need a change in the California law. Tell me what you think. I think it should be the Cindy Brown Mortgage Restitution Act, where nobody who owns a house can be dispossessed of it without a jury trial, and the jury must all be made up of other homeowners.
Yeah. Well, at least in the case of title fraud, right? And that's actually really prevalent. There are so many companies that are out there now.
No, I disagree,
What?
Joan, because once you say, at least in the case of title fraud, the other side will say there's no fraud, there's no fraud, there's no fraud. Boom, end of story, and you don't get a jury trial. I think every homeowner dispossessed of their home
Okay.
must be given a trial by a jury of other homeowners, people who are their equal, not people who are renters, not people who are just staying in a motel, passing through the county for a few days, vacationers on a jury. No, you want people who are solid in that community. And I know that Cindy just told me yesterday, 2 of her neighbors came down and gave her Thanksgiving dinner.
Mm-hmm.
And those were white people.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like everybody in that neighborhood is a racist and hates Cindy. It's that a certain party, whether it started with a guy named Diamond or somebody else, I don't know for sure, because I wasn't way back involved back then, but somebody defrauded her while she was overseas, and she had no aware. Someone stole her bank account numbers, stole her ID, sold her yacht, sold her limo, robbed that woman. She's been grossly robbed. And to lose your house on top of all of that and never get a jury trial? What does the 7th Amendment say, Joan Jackson?
I'm familiar with the Second Amendment.
Yeah, we need to keep that Second Amendment, Cindy in particular.
You know, I'm familiar with them, and right now I can't pull it up.
Well, it
but-
says no party shall be deprived of anything worth more than $20 without a trial by jury.
Ah, okay.
She's been deprived of a
Oh,
lot of
sorry.
stuff and never
I knew
got
that.
a jury. This is such a clear violation of the Seventh Amendment. It screams.
Yeah.
But see, most Americans, and I'm sure none of the sheriffs have ever read the Seventh Amendment. They have no clue. We've got a clueless group of officers who generally are nice people.
You know what?
But when
We
they're
have-
given an order, the order appears to be legal and appears to be based on real court issues decided. They just do what they're told. Well, that's what the Nazis did too. They just did what they were told.
I was going to tell you, we have a society now of people who almost know nothing about civics, especially if they're 40 or so or under, you know, who know nothing about civics. If you ask them, you know, what were the three branches of government, they may give you some answer that you could never have
Probably
expected.
say the Army, Navy, and Air Force.
Air Force. Yeah. And, you know, we have a lot of folks, and I'm ashamed to admit that when you asked me what the Seventh Amendment was, I couldn't pull it up instantaneously. But, you know, and so we have a lot of people who don't know what it is, what it means to be an American. They don't know what the Constitution really is supposed to be about. We have gotten so used to being a first world nation that is basically impervious to an overt attack that we've gotten comfortable and lazy, and we don't even know how to assert our rights. We've been anesthetized, we're distracted and entertained. We don't think like a citizenry that has a country and freedoms worth defending. And we need to have a huge movement to re-educate not only law enforcement officers like sheriffs, who are the only constitutional law enforcement officer there is. We also need to start educating the people, because when we sit here and don't know our rights, then we damn straight are going to lose them. And that's all there is to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I thank you for this interview, Attorney Joan Jackson. How soon are you going to file that Monday to help Cindy get her possessioners out of the house, if not get repossessed of the house?
Right. Monday. It would have to be Monday morning, and, you know, a call to the clerk to say this is emergent, and if it's not looked at and decided on by tomorrow, then they can go in and start messing with their stuff. They get to decide after 2 weeks following the eviction, they can go in and decide what should be stored and what can be gotten rid of. And their standard, I believe, is, does it look like it would bring in more than $300 in a garage sale? And if it doesn't bring in more, then they can let go of things. So,
Well,
you know,
she's got probably $50,000 of personal possessions in the house, a minimum of 50. I've been in her house.
yeah, and without regard to that, it's just like she's got photos. She's got, you know, everything that she's worked for is culminated inside of that house. And somebody might decide that these things aren't worth what she thinks they're worth, you know? But if she could get them out, she would have her most precious possessions. But to someone else, they may think it's worth nothing, or definitely worth less than 300, and therefore not worthy of being stored, you know?
Well,
So-
she's got a baby grand piano in there that she inherited from her mother, and it's got more than the value of a baby grand.
Absolutely. Exactly.
Something
Exactly.
her mother played music to her on. It's got tremendous value.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you for this interview. I hope to hear from you if the judge will grant some immediate relief for Cindy.
Hmm. We'll keep you updated. Absolutely.
I think she needs to go back into the civil unlimited court to, I forget the name of the judge in the state court,
Storm.
and say, what happened to the April 28th date?
Oh, well, we already understand what happened to the April 28th date. The April 28th date was basically, let's get back together and check what's going on with the case. Just a checkup. It was just a checkup. So if the case were accepted by the federal court and the federal court decided to dismiss it, then there pretty much would be no reason, of course, to show up in state court on the 28th of April. But if things were still going, the judge wanted to be apprised of what was going on. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for this interview, Attorney Joan Jackson. I'll leave you with this little barbed message.
Mhm.
There's an amendment to the Constitution,
Mhm.
and very few, if any, attorneys have ever been told about it.
Mhm.
But it was ratified in 1812.
Okay.
It's called the 13th Amendment.
Right. The original 13th Amendment. I know this one. I know this one.
Really?
Yes, I do. No attorney can be in office, right? So all the folks in Congress who are
Attorneys in Congress
right, exactly,
are there illegally. All the
exactly.
attorneys who are judges,
Mhm.
district attorneys, public defenders, dog catchers,
Mhm.
mayors,
Right. And you know
president.
why? You know why? Because they have a title.
That's right.
So what has happened is, we of course, adopted Great Britain's legal system. And that's why attorneys are called Esquire. It's a title.
Some attorneys still put Esquire after their name.
Yeah, I stopped doing that a long time ago. Every once in a while I do it just so someone's like, oh, she's an attorney. But for the most part, I don't bother. So we have a title. It's deemed a foreign title.
It is. Makes you a foreign agent.
Right. And
And
so
this-
people with foreign titles can't be in office.
What's amazing is that is still the law.
Mhm.
It was never repealed. It was ratified
Mhm.
200 some years ago. It's still the law, but after the second 13th Amendment at 1866, after Lincoln was assassinated,
Mhm.
they created a second 13th Amendment.
Correct.
And there's one state in 1868 actually published both 13th Amendments in the same volume.
Mhm.
And then after 1870, they only published the anti-slavery, anti-involuntary servitude 13th Amendment, and they totally forgot to keep publishing the original one, and it just isn't published anymore, but it was never repealed. So if it's not repealed, what does that mean?
It means you've got some actors who've been perpetrating fraud on the people of the United States of America, the Republic, for decades, if not centuries. It's time for people to wake up and find out that our Republic is under attack and will be lost if we don't wake up and start taking action.
I applaud you, Joan Jackson. I didn't expect you to know that. I have talked to attorneys who've gone to the best law school in Texas, best law school in Canada, got degrees from one, got a degree from the other. I talked to another attorney who's got a PhD in law, and he had never heard of it.
Right.
But I have 4 original volumes.
Mhm.
One from 1822, one from 1825 from the state of Maine that show a 13th Amendment back in the 1820s, 30s, 40s, 50s, have nothing to do with the one that came after the Civil War. So we know they don't publish false amendments to the Constitution for decades. Our ancestors in this country weren't that stupid.
Well, I started with that. If you give a man a bank, he can rob the world. And right. And here's what they do to us.
And Attorney Mays is a perfect symbol of why they passed this original 13th Amendment. They knew if these esquires created their own little club to rob the people, they would rob the people. And that's just what the Ryan Law Firm, in my view, appears to have done. Though there are other bad actors, Judge Stafford was resigned, some other judges did their bad stuff and they resigned. I sat in the courtroom at least half a dozen times with Cindy. I watched Judge Stafford, look at a document. Cindy said, here's the document they say I signed. It's not my signature. Look, they checked off white woman. Hello, Judge Stafford, do I look like a white woman to you? And he kind of chuckled and said, well, I get your point. At one point, Judge Stafford was taking cues from another attorney back in the corner of the courthouse. And the guy would give him a little thumbs up or thumbs down. And all of a sudden, Judge Stafford got up, said, "Whoa, it's hot in here," and he ran out. He didn't say dismissed or he just said, "It's hot in here," and he got and ran out. And that's how that hearing ended. And it was very clear to me, these gangsters, these foreign agents,
Well,
they
let me
got their own little club, and they're robbing not just Cindy, but they robbed Teddy Sheldon. They robbed a whole bunch of other people.
They rob everybody who has taxes taken out of their paycheck.
No, I agree with that.
And here's something that most people don't know. The Federal Reserve is a private bank. It is not a governmental agency.
That's true.
And the Federal Reserve has an ugly twin sister called the IRS. Both of them are basically corporations that are based in Puerto Rico. They are not governmental agencies. They are what the banksters manipulated into place after 1913 in order to defraud the American people and ultimately turn them into slaves. You go work and we get right off the top 10 to 20% of your money, right? And
That's
people don't know it. They don't know it. And you know what happened after the Civil War? Here's what the banksters do. The banksters are behind just about every war we have been in. And after the Civil War, a war in which they bankrolled both sides, instigated both sides, American people were so exhausted that they ushered in a new constitution. They ushered in the United States of America, Inc., a corporation based in Washington, D.C., which took over some of the administrative duties of the Republic. So when you see the United States of America, Inc., you are seeing a private corporation owned by banksters. And they engineered the IRS and the Federal Reserve to turn us into slaves because they created the 13th Amendment, right? You can only be forced to work if you're a prisoner. And this was your supra 13th Amendment. And now you're going to be forced to work and pay us through our means of controlling the corporations and the banks and literally Congress through our lobbyists and our money and everything else. Banks have robbed the world.
They have. And this is what I learned by going to Vietnam and coming back from Vietnam. I started to do a lot of soul searching. And that's when I started researching when I came back from Vietnam. And it's led me to do a TV show for 20 years. And when I discovered that this was not folklore, that this original 13th Amendment of 1812 was actually the real cause of the War of 1812. We were lied to. I was lied to in history class in high school and in college. The War of 1812 had nothing to do with soldiers being impressed into the Royal British Navy. That was a minor thing. The real thing is they said, you foreign agents, you bar members from England cannot set foot in a court of law here. You're foreign agents. And it's actually touched on in the original Constitution, but the original 13th Amendment makes it really strong and really clear. They can't hold any office of trust or profit. And wow, are they holding the offices and making them untrustworthy and making a big profit from the American people's. But that's another issue. This was about Cindy Brown, who, as we sit here in our comfortable homes, is uncomfortable in her own home because she's been robbed and defrauded.
Yes.
And it's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
Attorney Joan Jackson. We'll have to get
together.
Get together in the studio and do a proper interview one of these days.
Okay. Well, thank you for taking on our case and bringing light to it and sharing it with others.
I think people need to know that Judge Josephine Stanton has allowed this travesty to go on, even though she now knows that Mays deceived her initially, lied to her, should be disbarred and probably indicted for high treason.
Well,
I think high treason would be the appropriate indictment. And maybe, you know, if things get nasty enough in America, there'll be some anti-government grand juries formed to indict people like Mays. I don't know. I'm just a journalist. I'm just watching things from all corners of the country, and I see a lot of really unhappy people that have been dispossessed of their farms, their homes, their ranches, and they can't get justice in Judge James O'Carter's federal court. I've been there. And I asked him, why did you deny my media request? And Judge Carter said, oh, I'm all for the media in courts, just not my court. I'm all for freedom, just you can't have it today.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. That's the end of our interview, people. I hope this was worth watching. And I hope God gives these judges and these attorneys that did this to Cindy a taste of their own jurisprudence.
Thank you. I just hope that he works on their minds and their hearts so they can do the right thing.
Sometimes it takes some suffering to get your heart and mind in the right position. All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
The end. I'm William Wagener for Take Back America. People, if we don't take back this country, you may be the next person that has your home stolen, the equity taken, and you don't even find out till someone says, get out of your house. I'm the sheriff and we're evicting you. You've got 3 days to pack up and leave your own home. And they won't care if you suffered and lost a leg in Vietnam or Iraq. They won't care. They're just doing their job.
Following orders. That's right.
Shame on you, sheriffs. I hope Josephine Stein finds a way to bring justice to Cindy Brown.
Yes.
Good night, people. Thank you.